in the darkest corner of the galaxy, where three suns cast their dying light on a world that had become a graveyard, something impossible was about to happen. The Kepler 442b mining colony had been written off by every civilized species in the sector. The distress beacon had been silent for 2 years. The orbital defense grid was nothing but floating debris. The ground was littered with the bones of 100 different alien species who had tried and failed to break the siege. The Vorthak Empire had made an example of this place, a demonstration of what happened to worlds that dared to resist their expansion. For 18 months, the survivors had hidden in the deep mines, eating fungus and drinking recycled water, listening to the sound of Vorthak war machines patrolling the surface. Children born in those tunnels had never seen sunlight. Warriors had forgotten the taste of victory, but Earth remembers her children. And when humanity fights, the universe learns why every predator species in the galaxy has nightmares about the third planet from Sol. This is the story of how hope fell from the sky in drop pods marked with a simple blue and green flag, and how a species that should have been extinct taught the galaxy what it truly means to never leave anyone behind. Commander Zara Thane pressed her back against the cold metal wall of the maintenance tunnel. Her breathing shallow and controlled, the Vorthak patrol walker stomped overhead, its massive feet shaking dust from the ceiling joints. She counted the steps. 12 heavy impacts before the sound faded into the distance. Only then did she allow herself to exhale. The tunnel stretched ahead into darkness, lit only by the faint blue glow of her dying scanner. 18 months ago, this had been sub-level 7 of the Kepler Mining Consortium's primary extraction facility. Now it was home to the last 347 souls who still drew breath on this forsaken world. Zara checked her chronometer. The daily supply run to Section C was already behind schedule, but rushing meant death. The Vorthak had motion sensors scattered throughout the upper levels, and their hunter-killer drones never slept. She'd learned that lesson the hard way, when Corporal Martinez had tried to sprint through the main shaft last month. They'd heard his screams echoing through the ventilation system for hours before the sounds finally stopped. The supply pack on her back held everything precious they'd managed to scavenge from the abandoned cafeteria. Protein bars with expiration dates from 2 years ago, water purification tablets that might last another week, and 3 medical injectors they'd been saving for the children. At the current rate of consumption, they had maybe 40 days before starvation finished what the Vorthak bombardment had started. She moved forward, each step calculated and silent. The tunnel branched ahead, and she took the left fork towards Section C. This route was longer, but it avoided the collapsed area where Lieutenant Kowalski's team had been trapped 3 months ago. Sometimes, when the ventilation was just right, you could still smell the decay. The first sign that something was different came as she approached the main hub. Voices, excited whispers instead of the usual defeated murmurs. Zara quickened her pace, worry gnawing at her gut. Noise discipline was the first rule of survival down here. If someone was being careless with sound, it meant either very good news or very bad news. She emerged into the main hub to find nearly 50 people crowded around Chief Engineer Petrov, who was hunched over a battered communication array that should have died months ago. Sparks flew from jury-rig connections, and the smell of burning insulation filled the recycled air. "What's the situation?" Zara demanded, pushing through the crowd. Petrov looked up, his grease-stained face split by the first genuine smile she'd seen in half a year. "Commander, we're picking up a transmission. Long-range, military encryption. It's faint, but..." "But what?" she snapped, fatigue making her patience thin. "It's human," said Dr. Sarah Chen, the colony's chief medical officer, who was standing beside the array with tears streaming down her cheeks. "Zara, it's a human military transmission." The words hit Zara like a physical blow. Human military. That was impossible. Earth was 47 light-years away, and the last news they'd received before the Vorthak attack indicated that humanity was barely holding its own defensive lines around the Sol system. The idea that Earth had somehow mounted a rescue operation this far into Vorthak territory was, "Play it," she said quietly. Petrov adjusted several dials, and the static cleared just enough to make out a voice, calm, professional, speaking in accented English, repeating on all frequencies. "This is Admiral Sarah Mackenzie of the Earth Defense Force, aboard the ANS Indomitable. We are en route to Kepler 442b with a full liberation fleet. To any survivors, hold position and maintain operational security. Relief is 72 hours out. Repeat, relief is 72 hours out. Earth remembers. Mackenzie out." The hub fell silent except for the hum of failing life support systems. Zara stared at the communication array, her mind struggling to process what she'd just heard. Admiral Mackenzie. She knew that name. Sarah Mackenzie had been a captain when Zara was going through officer training at the Lunar Academy. A legend even then. One of the few human commanders who had gone toe-to-toe with Warthak battle groups and lived to tell about it. "How far out are they really?" asked Marcus Webb, the colony's senior geologist. His voice carried the weight of a man who had buried too many friends to believe in miracles. Petrov consulted his instruments. "Based on the signal strength and the transmission delay, I'd say they're telling the truth. Maybe 60 to 70 hours at current approach velocity." "That's impossible," said Dr. Chen. "Even if Earth had ships to spare, which they don't, the logistics alone, a fleet this far into enemy territory would need supply lines, forward bases." "Unless they didn't come the long way," Zara murmured, pieces clicking together in her head. "Unless they found another route." The crowd looked at her expectantly. Zara's tactical training kicked in, her mind automatically cataloguing possibilities. The Arcturus Nebula. If someone figured out how to navigate the gravitational anomalies, they could cut the travel time by 70%. It would be risky as hell, but possible, Webb finished. There were some theoretical studies about using the nebula's exotic matter to enhance jump drive efficiency. Most people considered it suicide. "Most people aren't human," said a new voice from the entrance tunnel. They turned to see Elena Rodriguez, one of their best scouts, emerging from the darkness with news written on her face. "Commander, we've got massive energy signatures building in orbit. Whatever's coming, it's big." Zara felt something she'd almost forgotten stirring in her chest. Hope. But hope was dangerous down here. Hope made you careless. Hope got people killed. "All right, people, listen up," she said, raising her voice to address the crowd. "We don't know what's happening up there. For all we know, this could be a Vorthak trick, some kind of psychological warfare. Until we have confirmation, nothing changes. Same security protocols, same watch schedules, same noise discipline." "But Commander," protested Maria Santos, holding her 6-month-old daughter, a baby who had never breathed fresh air or felt sunlight on her skin. "If there's really a chance, then we'll be ready for it," Zara said firmly. "But we'll be ready as soldiers, not as desperate civilians. Rodriguez, what's the Vorthak response to these energy signatures?"
The scout checked her scanner. "That's the weird thing, Commander."
"They're not responding. No increase in patrols, no changes to their defensive posture. It's like they don't know anything's happening." That was strange. The Vorthak were many things, brutal, efficient, merciless, but they weren't stupid. Their sensor network should have detected any approaching fleet long before human equipment could pick up transmissions. "Unless they're using stealth technology," Zara breathed. The EDF developed new stealth tech. The implications hit her like a thunderbolt. If Earth had managed to develop stealth systems capable of fooling Vorthak sensors, it meant humanity's technological capabilities had advanced far beyond anything she'd imagined. It meant they might actually have a chance. "Rodriguez, I want continuous monitoring of those energy signatures. Petrov, keep that communication array running no matter what. If this is real, we need to be ready to coordinate with whoever's coming down here." "What about the children?" asked Dr. Chen. "Some of them are too weak for any kind of emergency evacuation." And Maria's baby, Zara, looked around the hub, taking in the faces of people who had survived 18 months of hell through sheer stubborn determination. Children who played with makeshift toys in the shadows. Engineers who kept life support running with spare parts and prayers. Medical staff who performed surgery with tools designed for mining equipment. "We've kept these people alive for 18 months with nothing but determination and recycled air," she said. "We can keep them alive for 72 more hours." The transmission repeated every 30 minutes for the next 6 hours. Each time, Admiral Mackenzie's calm voice promised that relief was coming, that Earth remembered, that no one would be left behind. The energy signatures in orbit grew stronger, and Rodriguez reported increasing electromagnetic interference that suggested massive ships dropping out of hyperspace. But it was Dr. Chen who brought the first real proof that something extraordinary was happening. She burst into the hub, 12 hours after the first transmission, her medical scanner clutched in trembling hands. "Commander, you need to see this." Zara looked at the scanner's display and felt her breath catch. The device was picking up new types of radiation, exotic signatures that didn't match any known Vorthak technology. More importantly, The radiation patterns were consistent with Earth Defense Force ship classifications that were still theoretical when Kepler 442b had fallen. "This is impossible," Petrov whispered, studying the readings over her shoulder. "These energy signatures suggest ships using quantum phase drives. The last time I checked, those were still on the drawing boards." 18 months is a long time in wartime, Zara replied. "Necessity breeds innovation." She was about to say more when Rodriguez's voice crackled over the internal comm system. "Commander, you need to get up here, now." Zara made her way through the tunnels to Rodriguez's observation post, a carefully concealed position with a fiber-optic periscope that gave them a narrow view of the surface. Rodriguez was hunched over the eyepiece, her body tense with excitement. "Take a look, Commander." Zara peered through the periscope and felt her heart skip a beat. High above, so distant they appeared as tiny points of light against the star field, she could see them. Ships. Dozens of them, dropping out of hyperspace in perfect formation. Even at this distance, their design was unmistakably human, angular and efficient, bristling with weapons arrays and sensor clusters. "How many?" she asked. "I've counted at least 40 so far, and they're still arriving," Rodriguez replied. "Destroyer class, cruiser class, and... Jesus, Commander, I think that's a dreadnought." A dreadnought. Zara hadn't even known humanity possessed ships that large. When she'd left Earth, the largest vessels in the fleet were heavy cruisers. The idea that they'd not only built dreadnoughts but had them operational and deployed this far from home. "The Vorthak are responding now," Rodriguez continued. "I'm seeing their orbital platforms coming online and their ground forces are mobilizing." Zara watched through the periscope as lights began appearing across the surface, the illumination of Vorthak war machines emerging from their bunkers and defensive positions. For 18 months, those machines had been the apex predators of this world, hunting the survivors through the ruins of their colony. Now, suddenly, they looked small and fragile against the backdrop of the approaching human fleet. She activated her comm unit. "All sections, this is Commander Thane. Prepare for possible surface operations. Check your weapons, your ammunition, your emergency packs. If this is our ride home, we're going to be ready for it." The response was immediate, voices crackling back from tunnels throughout the complex, reporting readiness levels and equipment status. For the first time in 18 months, the survivors of Kepler 442b sounded like soldiers again. Above them, the largest military fleet in human history was about to announce to the galaxy that Earth's children were never truly alone. The first shots came at dawn. Zara jerked awake in her command alcove as the sound of naval railguns echoed through the planet's atmosphere like the voice of an angry god. The distinctive whine crack of accelerated projectiles moving at significant fractions of light speed was unmistakable. She'd heard it during the defense of Europa, back when she'd been young and foolish enough to believe wars could be won cleanly. "Commander!" Rodriguez's voice crackled over the comm. "You need to see this." Zara grabbed her gear and scrambled through the tunnels toward the observation post. The sounds from above were getting louder, not just railguns now, but the deeper rumble of plasma cannons and the staccato burst of point defense systems. The Vorthak were firing back, their distinctive purple energy beams lighting up the early morning sky like a deadly aurora. She reached the observation post to find Rodriguez and Petrov both crowded round the periscope, their faces illuminated by the reflection of weapon fire from above. The human fleets engaged the orbital platforms, Rodriguez reported without looking away from the scope. "They're not holding anything back, Commander. This isn't a probe or a rescue attempt. This is a full-scale assault." Zara took her turn at the periscope and immediately understood why Rodriguez sounded so awestruck. The space above Kepler 442b had become a battlefield on a scale she'd never imagined. The human fleet had formed a classic battle line, their ships advancing in perfect formation while laying down a devastating barrage of fire. The Vorthak orbital platforms, massive installations that had seemed unassailable 18 months ago, were returning fire with everything they had. But it was the human ships themselves that took her breath away. They were larger than anything in her memory of Earth's fleet, their hulls gleaming with what looked like new armor configurations. More importantly, they were moving with a coordination and precision that spoke of combat experience far beyond what Earth's military had possessed when the colony fell. "Look at their targeting," Petrov said, his engineer's eye-catching details that escaped her. "They're not just throwing firepower at the platforms. Every shot is calculated, coordinated. They know exactly where to hit to cause maximum damage." As if to emphasize his point, one of the human cruisers fired a concentrated burst at what appeared to be a minor sensor array on Platform 7. The resulting explosion was far larger than it should have been, suggesting the humans had identified and targeted a critical power coupling that most attackers would have missed entirely. They've been studying Vorthak technology, Zara realized. Someone's done their homework. The battle above continued for 3 hours. Gradually, the purple fire from the Vorthak platforms began to diminish as their weapon arrays were systematically destroyed or damaged. The human fleet pressed their advantage relentlessly, closing distance and concentrating fire until the first platform went dark entirely. Then the second transmission came. Kepler, 442b survivors, this is Admiral Mackenzie. Orbital resistance is neutralized. We are preparing to commence surface operations. Maintain your position and prepare for possible emergency evacuation. Be advised, Vorthak ground forces are mobilizing for defensive operations. Things are about to get loud down there. Loud was an understatement. Within minutes of the transmission, Zara could hear the rumble of Vorthak ground vehicles moving across the surface, their heavy treads shaking the tunnel complex. The alien forces had spent 18 months in occupation mode, conducting lazy patrols and occasional sweeps. Now they were shifting to full combat readiness, and the difference was immediately apparent. Rodriguez, what's the tactical situation up there? The scout consulted her instruments. Vorthak armored units are converging on the primary landing zones. The old spaceport and the commercial district. Looks like they're setting up killing fields, preparing for a ground assault. Smart, Zara admitted grudgingly. Force the humans to land in predetermined zones, then hit them with concentrated fire the moment they touch down. But will it work? Asked Dr. Chen, who had joined them at the observation post with several other section leaders. Before Zara could answer, the sky lit up with new fire. The human fleet's bombardment of surface targets began at exactly 000 local time. But this wasn't the indiscriminate orbital bombardment that had leveled most of the colony 18 months ago. These were precision strikes, surgical in their accuracy and devastating in their effect. Zara watched through the periscope as lance after lance of coherent energy reached down from the fleet above, each beam targeting a specific Vorthak position with mechanical precision. Gun emplacements that had terrorized the survivors for months simply vanished in flashes of superheated plasma. Armored vehicles that had seemed invulnerable found themselves reduced to molten slag in seconds. How are they getting targeting data that precise? Petrov wondered aloud. The answer came 20 minutes later, when Rodriguez spotted the first reconnaissance drone.
Contact, bearing 270, moving fast and low, she reported.
Wait, Jesus, Commander, that thing is tiny. I can barely see it even with the scope. Zara took a look and caught just a glimpse of something no larger than her fist, moving with impossible speed and agility as it wove between the ruins of the colony's residential district. As she watched, 2 more drones appeared, then 3, then dozens. Reconnaissance swarm, she breathed. They're mapping every Vorthak position in real time and feeding targeting data back to the fleet. The tactical implications were staggering. The humans weren't just attacking blind. They had real-time intelligence on every enemy position, every movement, every defensive preparation. The Vorthak ground forces, no matter how well entrenched, were fighting an enemy that could see them perfectly while remaining effectively invisible. The bombardment continued for another hour, each strike more precise than the last. Then, suddenly, it stopped. The silence was eerie after hours of continuous weapons fire. Zara found herself straining to hear any sound from the surface, but there was nothing except the distant hum of Vorthak machinery and the occasional crackle of cooling metal. Phase 2, she murmured. She was right. The first drop pods began their descent 30 minutes after the bombardment ended. Rodriguez spotted them first, tiny points of light falling from the fleet above, their descent controlled by some kind of advanced guidance system that allowed them to weave between debris and defensive fire with impossible agility. I counted at least 200 pods in the first wave, Rodriguez reported. They're coming down all over the primary landing zones, but, Commander, some of them are landing way outside the expected areas. Zara studied the drop pattern through the periscope. The majority of the pods were indeed landing in the cleared zones that the orbital bombardment had created, but a significant number were touching down in seemingly random locations throughout the ruins of the colony. They're not random, she realized. They're landing at every major Vorthak position that survived the bombardment. The tactical genius of it took her breath away. While the main force landed in the cleared zones and established a beachhead, smaller units were simultaneously attacking every remaining enemy strongpoint. The Vorthak defenders would be forced to fight on dozens of fronts at once, unable to concentrate their forces or coordinate an effective response. The first sounds of ground combat reached them 15 minutes after the pods landed. It started as distant gunfire, the familiar chatter of human assault rifles, mixed with the heavier reports of Vorthak plasma weapons. But as the battle spread, the sounds became a continuous roar of combat that echoed through the tunnels. "We need to make contact," Zara decided. "Rodriguez, take your best scout and see if you can get close enough to establish communication with the human forces. But for God's sake, be careful. In this confusion, they might shoot first and ask questions later." Rodriguez nodded and disappeared into the tunnels, taking her portable comm unit and emergency beacon. Zara turned her attention to organizing the survivors for possible evacuation, but her mind kept returning to the tactical display she'd witnessed. The human military had changed. The precision, the coordination, the technological advantages. This wasn't the same Earth Defense Force that had been struggling to hold the line around Sol 18 months ago. Someone had been busy, and the results were nothing short of revolutionary. Dr. Chen appeared at her shoulder. "Commander, I need to ask you something." "What is it, Doc?" "The children. Some of them are too weak for rapid evacuation. If the fighting comes down here," Zara met her eyes, "then we fight. We've protected them this long, and we're not going to fail them now." As if summoned by her words, an explosion echoed through the tunnels from somewhere above, closer than any of the fighting had been so far. The lights flickered, and dust rained from the ceiling. "Commander!" Petrov's voice crackled over the comm from the main hub. "We're picking up movement in the upper levels. Something's in the tunnels." Zara felt ice form in her stomach. If the Vorthak had found a way into the tunnel complex, if they'd decided to eliminate the survivors before the humans could reach them, "All sections, weapons ready," she ordered. "Prepare for possible incursion." But when Rodriguez's voice came over the comm 20 minutes later, it carried a tone Zara hadn't heard in 18 months. "Commander, you're not going to believe this. I've made contact with the human forces, and they want to talk to you personally. They know exactly where we are, and they're sending a team down to escort us out. How could they possibly know our location?" "That's what you're not going to believe, Commander. They've been tracking us for months. Those reconnaissance drones weren't just mapping Vortec positions, they were looking for us. Admiral Mackenzie says they have detailed intelligence on every survivor in the complex, including medical status and emergency evacuation priorities." The implications hit Zara like a physical blow. Earth hadn't just sent a rescue mission, they'd sent a mission specifically tailored to the situation on Kepler 442b. Someone had been planning this operation for months, gathering intelligence, preparing for every contingency. Earth remembered, indeed. The sounds of combat were growing closer now, but for the first time in 18 months, they were the sounds of someone else's war. The survivors were no longer alone, no longer fighting for their lives with improvised weapons and fading hope. Help had arrived, and it was unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. The first human soldier Zara saw in 18 months was a woman who looked like she had been carved from concentrated violence. Master Sergeant Lisa Chen, no relation to Dr. Chen despite the shared surname, emerged from the maintenance tunnel wearing powered armor that seemed to drink in light and reflect nothing back. Her weapon was something Zara didn't recognize. Sleek and predatory, with targeting systems that painted the tunnel walls with soft red light as she moved. But it was her eyes that caught Zara's attention, cold, professional, and utterly without fear. "Commander Thane?" The sergeant's voice came through external speakers with crisp military precision. "Master Sergeant Chen, 3rd Battalion, 1st Marine Expeditionary Force. Admiral Mackenzie sends her compliments and requests your immediate presence topside for tactical coordination." Zara found herself momentarily speechless. The woman standing before her represented everything she'd dreamed of for 18 months. Rescue, relief, a way home. But more than that, she represented a human military that had clearly evolved far beyond anything Zara remembered. "Sergeant, what's the tactical situation?" she managed. "Vorthak ground resistance is crumbling ahead of schedule," Chen replied with the matter-of-fact tone of someone discussing the weather. "Primary objective secured, secondary objectives 60% complete. Estimated time to total area denial, 4 hours, 17 minutes. Area denial? Ma'am, when we're done here, there won't be a single Vorthak left alive on this planet." The casual way Chen delivered that statement sent a chill down Zara's spine. She'd commanded troops in combat, seen what war could do to people, but there was something different about this soldier. Something harder and more focused than anything she'd encountered in the older Defense Force. "How many survivors do you have down here?" Chen continued, consulting a display that materialized in the air above her left gauntlet. 347, including 31 children under the age of 12. Copy that. We have medical teams standing by and transport allocated for full evacuation. But first, the Admiral wants a sitrep from someone who's been watching the Vorthak for the last 18 months. Zara turned to address her people, who had gathered in the hub to stare at this apparition from Earth. Chen, coordinate with the medical teams. Petrov, work with their engineers on safe passage routes. Rodriguez, you're with me topside. The journey to the surface was surreal. Chen led them through tunnels that Zara had considered secure, pointing out Vorthak sensors and monitoring devices that the sergeant's equipment revealed had been there all along. How the survivors had avoided detection for so long was apparently more luck than skill, though Chen was diplomatically professional about it. Your operational security wasn't bad, Commander, she said as they climbed toward the surface. The Vorthak just weren't trying very hard to find you. They figured starvation would do the job eventually. And now? Now they have bigger problems. The first thing Zara noticed when they emerged onto the surface was the sky. For 18 months it had been dominated by the massive bulk of Vorthak orbital platforms, their dark metal hulks blotting out portions of the starfield. Now, those platforms were debris fields, and the sky belonged to sleek human vessels that moved with predatory grace. The second thing she noticed was the sound. The continuous roar of combat had been replaced by something more ominous. The systematic sounds of demolition work. Explosions came at regular intervals, each one precisely timed and placed. "What are your people doing out there?" she asked. Chen's response was interrupted by the arrival of another figure in powered armor. This one wearing the insignia of a lieutenant colonel. The woman who emerged from the armor was older than Chen, her face bearing the kind of scars that spoke of serious combat experience. "Commander Thane?" "Lieutenant Colonel Sarah Martinez, 1st Battalion. The Admiral is waiting for you at the command post, but first she wanted me to show you something." Martinez led them across the ruins of what had once been the colony's main plaza. Zara was amazed to see how much had changed in just a few hours. The Vorthak fortifications that had dominated this area were simply gone, replaced by the geometric perfection of human military engineering. Defensive positions, communication arrays, and medical facilities had been erected with an efficiency that spoke of extensive practice. But it was the prisoners that stopped Zara in her tracks. They were arranged in neat rows under heavy guard, several hundred Vorthak soldiers stripped of their weapons and armor. She'd seen Vorthak before. Of course, their raids on the tunnel complex had given her plenty of opportunities to study her enemies. But she'd never seen them like this. Defeated, humiliated. Some of them were wounded, and human medics were treating their injuries with the same professional efficiency they'd show to their own people. "We don't execute prisoners," Martinez said, noting her expression. "But we also don't leave enemy forces behind to regroup and continue the fight. Where will you take them?" "The Admiral will explain that." They continued across the plaza toward a cluster of prefabricated structures that hadn't been there an hour ago. The speed and efficiency of the human deployment was staggering. In less than 6 hours, they'd not only defeated the Vorthak forces but established a complete forward operating base. Admiral Sarah Mackenzie was exactly what Zara had expected, and nothing like she'd imagined. The woman she remembered from the Lunar Academy had been tall and imposing, with the kind of presence that filled a room. The Admiral who looked up from the holographic tactical display was smaller somehow, more compact, as if 18 months of war had distilled her down to pure essence. "Commander Thane," Mackenzie said, extending a hand that bore new scars along the knuckles. "It's good to see you alive." "Admiral, I have to say, when we heard your transmission, I wasn't sure whether to believe it." "I don't blame you. Even 6 months ago, this operation would have been impossible." Mackenzie gestured to the tactical display, which showed the entire planet's surface covered in a network of blue indicators. "But warfare has a way of accelerating technological development." Zara studied the display. Every blue indicator represented a human unit, and there were thousands of them. "How many troops did you bring?" "This operation involved 230,000 personnel across 47 ships," Mackenzie replied. "The largest expeditionary force in human history." The numbers were staggering. When Zara had left Earth, the entire Earth Defense Force had numbered less than 100,000 active personnel. The idea that humanity had not only tripled the size of its military but deployed nearly a quarter of it on a single rescue mission. "With respect, Admiral, the logistics alone must be staggering." "How did Earth possibly manage to—" "Earth didn't," Mackenzie interrupted. "The Sol system did. Mars, Europa, Titan, the asteroid colonies. Everyone contributed. When word got out about what happened here, about what the Vorthak did to our people, the entire human sphere mobilized. She gestured to another section of the display, showing ship classifications that Zara didn't recognize. The Martian shipyards delivered 6 new dreadnoughts ahead of schedule. The Europan tech centers developed new stealth systems and sensor networks. The asteroid miners provided exotic materials for weapons we'd only dreamed of 18 months ago. And the Vorthak just let you build all of this? Mackenzie's smile was cold. The Vorthak had been busy fighting 3 other species along their border. They assumed humans were a minor threat, pinned down defending our home system. They were wrong. The implications were staggering. While the survivors had been hiding in their tunnels, believing themselves abandoned, the entire human civilization had been mobilizing for war on a scale the galaxy had never seen. Admiral, Martinez approached with a data pad in her hands. Final casualty reports are in. Mackenzie accepted the pad and scanned the numbers. Her expression didn't change, but Zara caught the brief tightening around her eyes. How bad? Zara asked. Acceptable, Mackenzie replied, which wasn't really an answer. Commander, I need you to understand something about this operation. What happened here wasn't just an attack on a mining colony. It was an attack on human civilians, under the protection of Earth. The Vorthak made it personal. She gestured to the tactical display again, zooming out to show the entire star system. This isn't just a rescue mission, Commander. This is a demonstration. As if summoned by her words, new icons appeared on the display. More human ships dropping out of hyperspace at the system's edge. Dozens of them, then hundreds. The second fleet will arrive within the hour, Mackenzie continued. They'll establish permanent patrol stations throughout this system. The third fleet is already en route to the Vorthak supply depot at Kepler. 442C. By the end of the week, we'll have removed every Vorthak presence within 30 light-years of Earth. Zara stared at the display, trying to comprehend the scale of what she was seeing. This is a full-scale counter-offensive. This is a statement, Mackenzie corrected. The galaxy needs to understand that humanity protects its own. That attacking human civilians has consequences that extend far beyond the immediate tactical situation. Rodriguez, who had been silent throughout the briefing, finally spoke up. Admiral, what about the colony? What about rebuilding? Mackenzie's expression softened slightly. The colony will be rebuilt, but not as a mining operation. This system is being designated as a forward military base. The Kepler system will become the anchor point for human expansion into this sector of the galaxy. The sounds of systematic demolition continued in the background as human engineers dismantled the remaining Vorthak installations. Zara realized that what she'd taken for simple combat cleanup was actually something far more comprehensive, the complete erasure of Vorthak presence from the planet. How long? She asked quietly. How long what? How long until every trace of them is gone? Mackenzie consulted her chronometer. Another 3 hours, 17 minutes. We're very thorough. As if to emphasize her point, a massive explosion erupted in the distance as the last Vorthak command bunker was reduced to its component atoms. The ground shook, and a pillar of smoke rose toward the sky where human ships waited with infinite patience. Admiral, Zara said slowly, what did the galaxy do to humanity?
Mackenzie met her eyes, and for a moment, the professional mask slipped.
What Zara saw underneath was something far more dangerous than military efficiency. It was the cold fury of a species that had been underestimated once too often. It taught us that mercy is a luxury we can't afford, Mackenzie replied, and that some lessons need to be taught in a language everyone can understand. In the distance, another explosion marked the systematic erasure of 18 months of occupation, oppression, and murder. The human military machine worked with mechanical precision, and Zara began to understand that what was happening on Kepler 442b was indeed just the beginning. Earth's children had come home, and they had brought the fury of an entire civilization with them. 3 days after the liberation of Kepler, 442b, Zara stood in the observation deck of the ENS Indomitable and watched the Vorthak Empire die. The view from Admiral Mackenzie's flagship was spectacular and terrifying in equal measure. The massive dreadnought hung in space above the planet like a steel cathedral, its weapon arrays tracking targets across half the system. Around it, the human fleet had deployed in a formation that spoke of absolute confidence, ships spreading out to patrol vectors that covered every possible approach, their sensors reaching deep into hyperspace to track any vessel that might threaten the operation. But it was the tactical display that truly captured Zara's attention. The holographic representation showed not just the Kepler system, but a sphere of space extending 50 light-years in every direction. And throughout that sphere, blue icons were advancing on red ones with methodical precision. 7 simultaneous assaults, Admiral Mackenzie explained, standing beside her at the massive viewport. The Vorthak thought they could scatter their forces throughout this sector and maintain control through fear and logistics. They were wrong. Sarah watched as another red icon flickered and disappeared from the display. Each vanished icon represented a Vorthak installation, a supply depot, a military outpost that had been systematically located and destroyed by human forces. The speed and coordination of the offensive was unlike anything in recorded galactic history. "How long has this been planned?" she asked. "The basic strategy was outlined 6 months after your colony went dark," Mackenzie replied. "But the detailed operational planning began the moment we received confirmation that there were survivors." 6 months, Zara repeated. "You've been preparing for this for 6 months. Commander, you need to understand what your survival meant to us. When the Voithak overran Kepler 442b, when they slaughtered thousands of civilians and made it clear that human colonies were acceptable targets, something changed in the human psyche. But it was the possibility that some of our people were still alive, still fighting, still hoping for rescue, that turned anger into purpose." Mackenzie gestured to another section of the display, showing industrial output charts from across the Sol system. "Every ship you see here was built in the last 18 months. Every weapon, every piece of armor, every sensor array. Martian factories running around the clock. Europan research centers pushing technological boundaries that we'd considered theoretical. Asteroid miners stripping entire rocks for rare elements. The entire human civilization focused on a single goal, getting us back, making sure this never happens again." The distinction was important, Zara realized. This wasn't just a rescue mission that had grown beyond its original scope. This was a fundamental shift in humanity's approach to galactic politics, a declaration that the species that had crawled out of Earth's gravity well would no longer accept the role of victim. A new voice interrupted her thoughts. "Admiral, we're receiving a transmission from the Vorthak High Command. Lieutenant Commander Sarah Walsh, Mackenzie's communications officer, appeared on the observation deck with the expression of barely concealed anticipation." Behind her, 2 Marines in full combat armor stood ready, a precaution that spoke volumes about how seriously the human command took any communication from their enemies. "Put it through," Mackenzie ordered. The holographic display shifted to show the image of a Vorthak war leader, its chitinous features arranged in what Zara had learned to recognize as extreme agitation. The alien's mandibles clicked rapidly as it spoke, the universal translator rendering its words in flat, emotionless tones. "Human Fleet Commander, you have violated 17 treaties and 34 sovereign system boundaries. Your actions constitute acts of war against the Vorthak Empire. Withdraw immediately, or face the consequences of your aggression." Mackenzie listened to the entire message without expression. When it finished, she gestured to Walsh. "Open a channel." The war leader's image appeared again, its compound eyes reflecting the lights of its command center. Mackenzie stepped forward, her hands clasped behind her back in a posture of absolute military formality. "War Leader Thaxic," she said, and Zara was startled to realize that the Admiral knew the alien's name and rank. "I am Admiral Sarah Mackenzie of the Earth Defense Force. I acknowledge receipt of your message." The Vorthak's mandibles stopped clicking abruptly. In the 18 months Zara had spent hiding from these creatures, she'd never seen one display anything resembling surprise. "You will withdraw your forces immediately," Thaxic repeated. But there was less certainty in its voice now. "No," Mackenzie replied simply. "War Leader, you are addressing the commander of a fleet that has just destroyed 47 of your installations, eliminated 6,000 of your troops, and captured an additional 2,000 for interrogation and intelligence exploitation. You are in no position to make demands. The Empire will not tolerate this aggression. Our response will be swift and decisive." Mackenzie smiled, and the expression was perhaps the most frightening thing Zara had ever seen. "War Leader, your Empire's response is already accounted for. As we speak, the human Second Fleet is engaging your relief forces at the Draconis shipyards. The Third Fleet has neutralized your supply depot at Kepler Parmesan 442c. The Fourth Fleet is currently removing your presence from the Centauri commerce route." She paused, letting the implications sink in. "You have approximately 36 hours before every Vorthak military asset within 50 light-years of human space ceases to exist. I suggest you use that time wisely." The war leader's image flickered, as if the alien was struggling to process what it was hearing. "This is impossible. Your species lacks the industrial capacity for such operations. Our intelligence indicates... Your intelligence is 18 months out of date, Mackenzie interrupted. And catastrophically incomplete. War leader, the Vorthak Empire made two critical errors in its assessment of humanity. First, you underestimated our industrial and technological capabilities. Second, you attacked civilians under our protection. The Admiral stepped closer to the holographic pickup, her voice dropping to a tone that somehow managed to be both conversational and absolutely terrifying. War leader, I want you to understand something about humans. We are not the pacifistic species your analysts described. We are not the technologically inferior civilization your strategists predicted. We are the descendants of predators who climbed to the top of one of the most hostile ecosystems in known space. And we did not get here by accepting defeat gracefully.
Thaxix's mandibles had resumed their clicking. Faster now, and with a higher pitch that Zara recognized as distress.
Your empire has existed for 3,000 years, Mackenzie continued. You have conquered 47 star systems and subjugated dozens of species. You consider yourselves the apex military force in this region of space. All of that ends now. You cannot possibly believe that a single species can challenge the combined might of the Empire. War leader, we're not challenging your empire. We're dismantling it. System by system, installation by installation. Until there is nothing left but scattered refugees hiding in the dark between stars. The tactical display updated as Mackenzie spoke, showing new reports from the various human fleets operating throughout the sector. Each update removed more red icons from the map, more Vorthak positions eliminated or captured. The difference between our species, Mackenzie said, is that when humans go to war, we go to war completely. We don't leave enemies behind us to regroup and attack later. We don't accept partial victories or negotiated settlements. We identify threats to our people and we remove them permanently. War leader Thaxix's image was beginning to break up as communication satellites throughout the sector were systematically destroyed or captured. But Zara could still hear the alien's voice, now carrying a note she'd never heard from a Vorthak before. Fear. What are your terms? It asked. Terms? Mackenzie's smile widened. War leader, you seem to be under the impression that this is a negotiation. It isn't. This is an extermination. The communication cut off abruptly as the last Vorthak relay station in the local cluster went silent. Mackenzie turned away from the display and walked back to the viewport, where the Liberation Fleet continued its methodical patrol patterns. Admiral, Zara said quietly, the galaxy won't stand for this. Other species will see what humanity is doing and band together to stop us. Let them try, Mackenzie replied. Commander, in the last 18 months, humanity has tripled its fleet strength, quintupled its industrial capacity, and developed weapon systems that make our previous technology look like children's toys. More importantly, we've learned that the galaxy respects only one thing: strength. She gestured to the tactical display where the blue icons continued their relentless advance through Vorthak space. Every species that has contact with the Vorthak will see what happens when you attack human civilians. They'll see that we don't just defend ourselves, we eliminate threats completely and permanently. And if they decide that makes us the threat? Mackenzie's expression didn't change. Then they'll learn the same lesson the Vorthak are learning right now. A new alert chimed from the communication station. Walsh looked up with the expression of grim satisfaction. Admiral, we're receiving surrender requests from 17 different Vorthak installations. They're requesting safe passage to neutral space in exchange for complete evacuation of human territorial claims. Denied, Mackenzie replied without hesitation. Continue operations as planned. Ma'am, some of these are civilian installations. Research stations, medical facilities, Lieutenant Commander, the Vorthak made no distinction between civilian and military targets when they attacked our colonies. We will extend the same courtesy to them. Zara felt something cold settle in her stomach. She'd spent 18 months thinking of the Vorthak as monsters, creatures without mercy or compassion. But listening to Mackenzie's casual dismissal of surrender requests, watching the systematic extermination of an entire regional empire, she began to wonder if humanity had become something just as frightening. Admiral, she said carefully, what happens after? When the Vorthak are gone, when their territory is empty, what then? Mackenzie turned to look at her, and for a moment her expression softened. Commander, you've been fighting for survival for 18 months. You've seen what the galaxy can do to humans when we're weak, when we're scattered, when we rely on others for protection. That ends now. She gestured to the fleet around them, hundreds of ships that represented the largest military force humanity had ever assembled. From now on, humans protect humans. From now on, Anyone who threatens our people faces the full weight of our technological and industrial capabilities. From now on, the galaxy learns that Homo sapiens is not a species to be trifled with. In the distance, another star system fell to human forces as the Third Fleet completed its objectives ahead of schedule. The Vorthak Empire, which had stood for 3 millennia, would not survive the week. Zara watched the tactical display update with mixed emotions. The rescue she had dreamed of for 18 months was complete. The enemies who had hunted her people through dark tunnels were being systematically eliminated. But looking at the scope of humanity's response, at the cold efficiency with which they were dismantling an entire civilization, she began to understand that the galaxy was about to learn a very dangerous lesson about the species from the third planet around Sol. Earth's children were no longer content to merely survive. They had decided to dominate, and the universe was about to discover that there was no middle ground between those two states when dealing with humans. 6 months after the liberation of Kepler, 44.2b, Zara stood before the Galactic Council and watched 47 different species try to decide whether humanity represented salvation or damnation. The council chamber on Nexus Prime was a marvel of diplomatic architecture, designed to accommodate the wildly different physiologies and environmental requirements of every member species. Atmospheric zones shifted between methane and oxygen-based mixtures. Gravity fields adjusted in real time to accommodate beings that had evolved on worlds ranging from gas giants to asteroids. Light levels and frequencies changed across the spectrum to ensure that every delegate could see and be seen. But for all its technological sophistication, the chamber couldn't mask the fundamental tension that had brought them here. In the 6 months since humanity had systematically dismantled the Vorthak Empire, the balance of power in this region of the galaxy had shifted dramatically, and nobody quite knew what to make of it. Zara wore the uniform of a captain in the Earth Defense Force. Her promotion had come through 3 months ago, along with a new assignment as humanity's military liaison to the Galactic Council. It was a position that hadn't existed before the Vorthak War. But then again, many things that hadn't existed before were now part of the new galactic reality. The question before this council, declared Primus Valdek of the Helian Confederacy, is whether humanity's actions in the former Vorthak territories constitute a legitimate response to aggression or a dangerous precedent for galactic warfare. Murmurs rippled through the chamber in dozens of languages and communication methods. The aquatic delegation's translation pools bubbled with agitation. The silicon-based representatives from the Titan Collective pulsed with infrared patterns that Zara's translator rendered as concerned discussion. Even the normally stoic crystal hegemony showed signs of unusual activity in their harmonic resonance fields. Ambassador Elena Vasquez, humanity's chief diplomat, rose from her delegation's position with the measured grace of someone who had spent the last 6 months learning to navigate galactic politics. She was younger than Zara had expected when they'd first met, but there was a hardness to her eyes that spoke of someone who had seen too much, too quickly. Honored delegates, Vasquez began, her voice carrying clearly through the chamber's translation matrix. The Earth delegation appreciates the Council's concern about recent events in the Kepler sector. However, we must reject the characterization of our actions as disproportionate or precedent-setting. She gestured, and a holographic display materialized in the center of the chamber, showing the star chart that had become so familiar to Zara over the past months. But this version showed temporal data, the progression of events that had led from the first Vorthak attack on human colonies to the systematic elimination of their entire regional presence. The Vorthak Empire initiated hostilities against human civilian populations without provocation or warning, Vasquez continued. Their attacks resulted in the deaths of over 200,000 human civilians across 7 different star systems. They showed no mercy to non-combatants, no respect for established laws of war, and no willingness to negotiate or cease their aggression. The display zoomed in on Kepler 442b, showing the timeline of the siege and the conditions that survivors had endured for 18 months. Several delegates shifted uncomfortably as the data made clear the systematic nature of Vorthak brutality. What my government did, Vasquez said, was respond to genocide with the complete elimination of the threat. We make no apologies for this, nor do we accept that any galactic authority has the right to question our methods of protecting our people. Primus Valdek's crystalline form shifted colors in what Zara had learned to recognize as diplomatic agitation. Ambassador Vasquez, the concern of this council is not with humanity's right to self-defense. It is with the scope and totality of your response. The complete elimination of Vorthak military capabilities across a 50 light-year sphere represents a level of force projection that fundamentally alters the balance of power in this region. As it should, Vasquez replied without hesitation. Primus Valdec, the previous balance of power allowed for the systematic slaughter of human civilians. That balance was unacceptable to my government and my people. A new voice entered the debate. The harmonic tones of Speaker Chorus of Winds from the avian hegemony. The question that troubles many of us, Ambassador, is what humanity's intentions are now that the Vorthak threat has been eliminated. Your fleets remain in the former Vorthak territories. Your bases are being expanded rather than reduced. This suggests a permanent military presence rather than a temporary security operation. Zara had been expecting this question. It was the core issue that had brought the Galactic Council together in emergency session. Humanity's rapid expansion into former Vorthak space had created a power vacuum that nobody quite knew how to address. Speaker Chorus of Winds raises a valid concern, Vasquez acknowledged. I'm authorized to address humanity's long-term intentions in this matter. The chamber fell silent. Even the background hum of environmental systems seemed to fade as every delegate focused on the human ambassador's words. The Earth government has designated the former Vorthak territories as a human protection zone. Any species or organization that threatens human lives or human interests within this zone will face the same response that the Vorthak faced. This is not negotiable, and it is not subject to council approval or oversight. The reaction was immediate and varied. Some delegates erupted in outraged discussion. Others withdrew into defensive postures. The aquatic delegation's pools literally boiled with agitation. But perhaps most telling was the response of the species that had been Vorthak neighbors. They remained absolutely silent, their attention fixed on Vasquez with what Zara recognized as careful calculation. Primus Valdec's form shifted to a deep red that the translation matrix rendered as formal protest. Ambassador, you cannot simply declare sovereign space as human territory. The Council has procedures for territorial disputes, mechanisms for... The Council had procedures for preventing genocide as well, Vasquez interrupted. Where was the Council when the Vorthak was systematically murdering human civilians? Where were your procedures when our colonies were being bombarded from orbit? She gestured to the holographic display again, which now showed the voting records from 18 months ago when human delegates had first brought evidence of Vorthak aggression to the Council's attention. 17 different motions for intervention were proposed, Vasquez continued. 17 different requests for Council action to protect human lives. Every single motion was referred to committee, delayed for further study, or killed in procedural votes. The Council had its chance to prevent this tragedy through diplomacy and collective action. That chance was rejected. The silence that followed was deafening. Zara could see the uncomfortable truth settling over the chamber like a blanket. The Galactic Council had failed in its fundamental responsibility to protect member species from aggression, and humanity had drawn its own conclusions from that failure. What my government learned, Vasquez said into the silence, is that the only protection humans can truly rely on is the protection we provide for ourselves. The Human Protection Zone ensures that no human colony will ever again face the choice between abandonment and annihilation. A new delegate rose, Ambassador Kelix of the Reptilian Union, whose species had lost 3 colonies to Vorthak expansion over the past century. Ambassador Vasquez, speaking hypothetically, would humanity extend this protection to other species that faced similar threats? It was the question Zara had been waiting for. In the months since the liberation, dozens of species had approached human representatives with various proposals, requests, and offers. The galaxy was beginning to understand that humanity's military capabilities represented a potential solution to problems that the Galactic Council had proven incapable of addressing. Ambassador Kelix, Vasquez replied carefully, humanity is willing to discuss mutual defense agreements with species that share our commitment to protecting civilian populations and respecting the sovereignty of peaceful worlds. The implications hung in the chamber like a thundercloud. The Galactic Council's authority rested on the principle that disputes between member species would be resolved through discussion and consensus. But humanity was openly offering an alternative: direct military protection for species willing to align themselves with human strategic interests. Primus Valdec's form had shifted to a color that Zara didn't recognize, but which the translation matrix rendered as deep concern. Ambassador, you are describing the foundation of a military alliance that could fracture the very basis of galactic cooperation. The Council system exists to prevent exactly this kind of power consolidation. Primus Valdec, Vasquez replied, the Council system exists to protect peaceful species from aggression. When it fails in that responsibility, alternatives become necessary. She paused. looking around the chamber at the assembled delegates. Let me be absolutely clear about humanity's position. We will not again allow our people to be slaughtered while bureaucrats debate procedures. We will not accept that human lives are less valuable than galactic political stability. And we will not pretend that the current system works when the evidence clearly demonstrates that it doesn't. The chamber erupted in discussion as delegates conferred with their home governments through quantum communication links. Zara watched the reactions and realized she was witnessing a fundamental shift in galactic politics. The age of consensus-based governance was ending, and something harder and more direct was taking its place. Ambassador Vasquez returned to her seat beside Zara, her expression carefully neutral. "Captain, your assessment of the Council's response?" "About what we expected," Zara replied quietly. "They're scared of us, but they're more scared of what happens if they try to stop us." "And the species that were approached by our diplomatic corps? 7 confirmed mutual defense agreements so far. 3 more pending approval from their home governments. The Reptilian Union just gave us their answer." Indeed, Ambassador Kellix was making his way across the chamber toward the human delegation, his scaled features arranged in what passed for a smile among his people. The first formal ally was about to make their choice clear. "Ambassador Vasquez," Kellix said as he reached their position, "the Reptilian Union would like to discuss the terms of your proposed mutual defense agreement." And with those words, the galaxy learned that the age of human isolation was over. Earth's children had not simply survived their first galactic war. They had emerged as a force that would reshape the political landscape of local space. 6 months ago, Zara had been hiding in tunnels, believing that rescue would never come. Now she stood in the heart of galactic government, watching her species announce that they would be the ones doing the rescuing from now on. The universe was about to discover that when humans decided to take responsibility for something, they took complete responsibility. The protection of human colonies had evolved into the protection of anyone willing to stand with humanity against the darkness between stars. And for the first time in galactic history, that protection came with teeth sharp enough to bite back.